Good morning, everyone. At least it's morning for me. I'm having quite a peaceful day so far. Rook is at his grandparents' house for the day, so I'm getting to just chill with Finn. He did put me through the ringer a little bit last night, but it's okay because I only have one child to care for. So I figured since I have a little bit of spare time, I would sit down and tell you guys my birth story. Like I mentioned in Finn's birth announcement, things didn't go as I expected, and so there's a lot to talk about, so buckle in. My birth story actually starts at 37 weeks. If you've been listening to the podcast, you will have a bit more information on this. So I had my regular 37-week appointment with my midwife, and at every appointment after I think like 30 weeks, they measure your fundal height, which is like the measurement of your belly just with a tape measure, if you didn't know. And basically however many weeks you are is supposed to line up with your measurement of your belly. So if you're 37 weeks, you're supposed to be 37 centimeters. It isn't a perfect science though, so they say there's like a 2 centimeter variance that is still normal. So with Rook, I was always 1 centimeter behind, which is no big deal. I expected the same with this pregnancy because I was carrying small again. And from 30 to 36 weeks, it was the same thing. I was measuring 1 centimeter behind. And then at 37 weeks, I was measuring 3 centimeters behind. Not a big deal, but my midwife said being out of the 2 centimeter range, it's protocol at the midwifery to go in for an ultrasound just to check on baby. It was a little nerve-wracking because any sort of complication in pregnancy is scary no matter how minor it is, because I don't know, I just feel like things can go south so fast with your baby. I've heard a lot of stories, and you're also hormonal, so I just wasn't really as calm as I feel like I should have been. But either way, I went in for that ultrasound. It was also booked a week and a half from when I had that midwife appointment, so that gave me a lot of peace. Like if there was a real concern, they would have rushed me like to the hospital to get a scan. But with the ultrasound clinics being like backed up for the past 2 years, that was as soon as they could get me in. So I go in for that appointment, and the technician does the whole screening. He of course doesn't tell me anything because they're not allowed to, but I find that usually the tech will say something like, looks great, or baby looks happy, or I don't know, like usually something positive to give you that like peace. But he didn't say anything. I asked like, does it all look good in there? And he's like, I'm not allowed to disclose anything. If there's a concern, your doctor will call you. And I was like, yeah, I know that, thanks. No hate against him, like that's how you're supposed to do it. But I would have liked something. So that was a Friday. I didn't get a call that day, so I figured like, okay, no emergency. I had a midwife appointment on Monday. We'll talk about it then if we need to. Finn is starting to wake up. I might have to feed him. But then Saturday morning comes around, and I was driving at the time when I got a call, which was not ideal because you don't want to be driving when you get a really scary phone call. And it said my midwifery's name on the caller ID. So I immediately panicked. You're not supposed to get a call unless something's wrong, so something's wrong. And my midwife says that baby's abdomen is measuring under the 10th percentile. She needs me to come to the hospital to have a consultation with the OB that's on the floor at the moment. How soon can you get here, kind of thing. So that was a horrible day. So stressful, as you can imagine. Your mind starts like running through all the possibilities. I had no idea what it meant for a baby to have a small abdomen. Like, is this a big concern? Is this an issue with the baby themselves or with the pregnancy? Because if it's the pregnancy, then we can just get baby out and baby's fine. But if it's the baby having a problem, that's very scary, like NICU stay, complications, like my mind was running with it, right? So I meet up with Josh, we go to the hospital, and I figure I'm getting induced because why else would they send me there? But I didn't really, I had no idea what was going on, but I just thought I have to be getting induced right now. Midwife meets me there with the OB, and they say that yes, the baby's abdomen is under the 10th percentile, but the head size is average, the overall baby size is average, And the concern with a small abdomen is that they are lacking nutrients from the placenta, so it would be a placenta problem. But usually placenta issues come along with low amniotic fluid and cord issues, and they said my ultrasound showed that those two things were good, so it would be preemptive to, or like overkill to induce me right now when I only have one symptom of something. So doctor said or suggested that I go in for weekly ultrasounds from now on, weekly non-stress tests to make sure things don't decline. As long as they don't decline, we're good. I am 37 weeks at this point, so I'm full term, so that was really comforting. Also, Finn was really active in the womb, so that helped me a lot knowing that he was okay, because when you get news like that and you go home, you just like are automatically always stressing about like, is my baby okay? Because there is something potentially going on. Everyone in my life was telling me that it's fine, but again, with like the hormones and everything, it was kind of hard to cope with. So you just don't know. So then 38 weeks comes around and I go for my follow-up ultrasound. These ultrasounds are at the hospital now because they can get you in quicker. I go in for that one. The doctor also said that from now on they're only going to measure the amniotic fluid level and check on the cord's health. He said because we already know the baby's small or the abdomen is small, and that ultrasound measurements can be a little inaccurate. I don't know. So if I had those other two issues come up with the fluid and the cord, then we would move forward with, a game plan. So I go in for that ultrasound at 38 weeks. She doesn't tell me anything, as you can expect. The next day I had my non-stress test at the hospital. My midwife was there for that, and she said the ultrasound came back great, no issues with the fluid or the cord. I keep saying that. So that was really great. Also, my non-stress test, actually, that one was a little complicated. Like, it was just dramatic for no reason. Finn decided to take a 45-minute nap during the non-stress test, so his heart rate was low and he wasn't moving. So that was really stressful. And then all of a sudden he woke up and like his readings were all normal. So yeah, that was unnecessarily stressful. So after that, I figure, everything's great. Like, I haven't had any decline in things. Like, I'm gonna go full term, probably to 40 weeks like I did with Finn or with Rook, and everything's great. I also at this point was having 3 appointments a week, midwife, non-stress test, and ultrasound, which was a lot, especially with finding like care for Rook during those appointments. So I was just really ready to have this baby out, so I didn't have to stress over it anymore, and I didn't have to deal with all this stuff, obviously. So 39 weeks comes along and I have that ultrasound, and I'm chatting more with this technician. She's just more chatty, and she is asking me about what's going on with my pregnancy, why I'm doing all these tests, and I tell her about the baby's abdomen size. And I guess because I had talked to her about what was going on, she measured the baby's size, because again, she wasn't supposed to, and I didn't know about this till later, but just so you know. Yeah, she measured the amniotic fluid, checked on the cord, and did check the size of the baby. So I went to leave that office, and she was like, I hope you have your baby soon, best of luck. And I was like, same, because I don't want to deal with this anymore. So I leave the hospital, like go out to the parking lot, get in my car. Halfway pulling out of my stall, I get a call from the hospital, and it's not going to be good news. I have this coping mechanism when there's bad news, but I don't know the whole story. I'm able to like keep it together until I know how bad things are, which is really handy. So I pull back into my stall, pick up the phone, and she's like, hi Ashley, this is radiology calling. Can you head up to maternity? And I was like, right now? And she's like, right now. So put the car in park, walk back into the hospital, trying to not freak out. I didn't tell Josh anything at this point because it was 4 p.m. and he was driving home from work in rush hour, and I didn't want him to be really stressed and not able to do anything about it because he's like stuck in traffic. So I figure when I know what's going on, I'll tell him. So I go up to maternity, and funny enough, there was like 3 women walking in active labor at that time. So they were very busy. And I just kind of sat in a chair and waited for someone to come to me, because obviously I wasn't priority. And nurse eventually comes over, asks what I'm doing there, and she didn't have any information on the matter. Apparently radiology hadn't told maternity what was going on yet. Weird enough, the nurse was like, usually they tell us when they send someone up. So in the meantime, she set me up with a non-stress test because I told her my situation, right? And I'm just waiting there with no husband to get comfort from and thinking of worst case scenarios. Again, I'm back on the track of I'm definitely getting induced today. Like, I just had an ultrasound and I got told to come here. Something's wrong. Baby's coming out. But also I'm like, I thought that last time, so maybe it's not what's happening. It's very confusing. So I'm sitting in the hospital bed, texting my sister, because she at the time was on an airplane, so she had all the time in the world to help comfort me. But I also didn't want to like message people who would like stress or be like, or like wanting to come to the hospital to help. Like, I didn't know what the situation was, so I didn't want any involvement yet. So I was just finding comfort in giving my sister like play-by-plays. And at a certain point, I hear the nurse get a call from radiology, because I heard them talking about like say my name and such. But it was really hard to hear what was going on, because there's 3 other women in labor around me, because they have like a waiting area with a bunch of with a bunch of beds just like curtained off, I guess to like see if you're actually in active labor, and then you get admitted, whatever. So I hear the nurse talking, and I have a really hard time hearing, but I am pretty sure that I heard that the baby hasn't grown in 2 weeks. And so that was really scary to hear, but I was like, you know what, I don't know if I really heard that right. So like, I can't again freak out until I know the whole story, but I'm like telling my sister all of this, like, baby hasn't grown. And eventually, like, I don't know how long, it felt like a long time. Eventually, nurse comes to my bed. You know, nurses have been in and out, but a nurse comes to my bed saying, my midwife has been called. She's gonna come talk out a game plan with you. That's not great news. Or I guess it is good news, but it means something's happening, right? So just hang tight. And I ask, like, should I have my husband here for this? And she's like, oh yeah, definitely get him to come down. So I'm like, okay, like I'm absolutely getting induced at this point. Again, worst case scenario is running through my head. So I called Josh. He's actually really close to the hospital at this point, so that was helpful. So he came up to the maternity ward, and the OB that was on the floor and my midwife come, and we have a chat. So the ultrasound found that my amniotic fluid levels were good. The cord health was good. Baby's head size and overall size were average, but the abdomen size has gone from the 10th percentile to below the 2nd percentile. So that was bad news. She said specifically the baby has grown 2 days worth. Sorry, the baby's abdomen has grown 2 days worth in 2 weeks. So we need to induce you. That was really hard to hear, obviously. And she said at this point, the safest option is to induce you, because it seems like baby's not getting enough nutrients. And I was like, absolutely, let's do it. I'm scared and I want my baby to be okay, obviously. But because they were so busy, I wasn't gonna get a room for a couple hours, because I also needed a nurse on me full time. So they said Josh could head home, get my hospital bag, set up the babysitter, sort all the things out and come back. So that was nice. I just sat and ruminated waiting. The game plan we set out was, you know, I would get induced, which can have a variety of methods used depending how your body reacts to it, which thankfully I listened to so many birth story podcasts that I had a general idea of what induction looks like. It was just really helpful kind of to know what to expect. So they were going to induce me, but first they had to test to make sure that the baby's heart could handle contractions. They said sometimes small babies aren't able to handle the contractions, so they need to make sure that that's fine first. And if the baby passes the test, then we move forward with the induction. If they fail the test, then I need to get a C-section, which was really hard to hear because that is the last thing I want. I'm pretty flexible with my birth plan, but I just really didn't want a C-section. You know, the healing is so much harder. specifically, Josh was only getting 2 weeks off work, and you're not allowed to drive for 6 weeks after a C-section, so that would be really hard. And the biggest thing for me was I have a toddler, and you're not allowed to pick up your toddler for 6 weeks, and he's still sleeping in a crib, right? So like, what am I supposed to do? I know a lot of women do it and they're fine. A lot of women opt for C-sections. They, you know, everyone has their preference. I personally would really not enjoy that. That was my worst case scenario. Obviously, I wanted the baby to be safe. That's the primary focus, but I really didn't want a C-section. So knowing that that was a possibility was scary. They also said I couldn't eat or drink anything until the baby passes the test because in case I need an emergency C-section. And at the time, I hadn't eaten anything since 11:30 in the morning because my ultrasound was at 3 o'clock and I just hadn't eaten since lunch. So that wasn't great, but because my room got pushed back so long, the doctor came back and said I could eat like a little snack. So Josh brought me 2 chicken strips, which was great. And I was only allowed like sips of water, like they really did not want me taking things in. So eventually Josh gets back. We're just hanging out in that waiting room, and it was at 9 p.m. when I got my room. They set me up with an IV, which was horrible. I didn't know that IVs could be so horrible, but they tried 6 times to poke me and failed every time, I think because I was dehydrated, and 3 nurses it also took. Eventually they got me, but it was so painful. I had no idea it could be so bad. And after they finally got an IV in me, the nurse is like, do you want a popsicle or something? Because she felt bad, right? And I was like, I would love one. And I was like, am I allowed a popsicle? She's like, wait, are you on like a no-eat order? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, I'm so sorry, I can't get you a popsicle. So that was really funny and sad. So the test that they were doing on baby was putting me on oxytocin really slowly to see again how the baby's heart responds. It was like starting at the lowest dose of oxytocin and bumping it up, I don't know how much, like the lowest amount every half hour, so very slow. And I asked what it takes to pass the test, and she said that the baby needs to go through, it was something like 3 substantial contractions in a row without their heart rate dropping. And she said substantial meaning like not period cramps, like you're actually like working through the contraction, breathing through it kind of thing. So we start the test at 10 p.m. and it's really slow going, as I already said. Not feeling anything for the first half hour, feeling like mild cramps for the hour after that. And it was at 12 o'clock, so I'd been on oxytocin for 2 hours, and Josh was laying down trying to relax because it's midnight, right? And I was relaxing, not sleeping, because like I was feeling the contractions, but it was like cramps, but enough that I couldn't sleep, you know, but my eyes were closed. The nurses were out of the room at this time. I, for some reason, had 2 at this point. Then all of a sudden, the 2 nurses and the doctor come in, and they say something along the lines of like, okay, that might be it, or that, I don't know what she said, but something that was like, that's the end of the test. And I asked, obviously, what's happening, and she said that the baby's heart rate dropped to, it was either 60 or 70 BPM for 50 seconds, which is substantial. And so kind of implying the baby failed the test. This was another one of the worst parts of everything. So the doctor laid it out for me. He said, you need to seriously think about going forward with a C-section because you haven't even been having strong contractions at all. You're only cramping, you're kind of sleeping through them, and baby's heart rate already dropped. Baby already can't handle it, so how are they supposed to handle full labor? Which was very valid, very scary thing to talk about. But he said it is still your option if you want to move forward with the test further and see if the heart rate drops again. The concern is if the heart rate drops and they can't bring it back up and the OR is being used and I can't go in for an emergency C-section, like that's worst case scenario, which is pretty horrible. And like, my midwife wasn't there at the time because I hadn't actually started my induction technically. I was just doing the test, and I really wish that she was there because I needed I needed more insight on how to decide what to do, because I didn't want to make an unsafe choice for my baby, but I also know that so many women get C-sections unnecessarily when they're told that they have to, and that's not necessarily the case. The doctor wasn't telling me I had to. He was just laying it all out there. They're not allowed to tell you what to do. They're not allowed to give their opinion. They just tell you the facts. And so he leaves the room to let me and Josh talk about it, and I'm so confused. And I asked the nurses for more information, and one of the nurses was so helpful. Again, she can't tell me what to do, but she said it's not uncommon for a baby's heart rate to drop. It can just happen from them like moving in a weird position, leaning on the cord. It happens. Also, the biggest piece of information that helped me decide was that the heart rate actually didn't drop during a contraction. So that was great to hear because, you know, baby probably can still handle the contractions. It probably just was an anomaly of weird positioning. So doctor comes back in and I say, I'd like to move forward with the test further. If the heart rate drops again, we'll move forward with the C-section. And he was like, totally great, that's fine. And he specifically said, I wouldn't have given you the option to choose if I didn't think it was still relatively safe to move forward with the test. So that was great. Also, after I had the baby, my midwife was like, oh yeah, you definitely shouldn't have had a C-section. And I was like, where were you? I would have really appreciated that earlier. So we move forward with the test. For the next hour, my contractions build a little bit more. I was like, definitely when I would go through the wave of a contraction, I would have to breathe through it, kind of adjust my position a little bit, but it wasn't strong enough that I would have like gone to the hospital yet if I had been contracting at home, just based on my last pregnancy and birth, etc. So I'm just sitting there dealing with it. The nurse is beside me tracking everything. And then all of a sudden, my water breaks, which was so cool and weird to feel. I didn't feel it with Rook because I had the epidural at the time. And yeah, I was just like at the peak of a contraction, and it felt almost like the baby kicked me really sharp, and then I felt the pop and then gushed fluid. And I was like, ah, like I screamed because I didn't know what happened. And I said, I think my water just broke. And she said, okay, let me like test the fluid. I'm like, test the fluid? Like if that's not my water, like something else is wrong. Like that was definitely my water. Sure enough, it was. And so I'm like, what does this mean? And she's like, well, you've had, you know, the 3 contractions, baby's heart rate is great, plus your water breaking, you've passed the test. Hallelujah, that was the best news I could have gotten, knowing I didn't make an unsafe decision for my baby, and I don't have to get a C-section. So thankful that went the way it did. So I get out of bed, go to the bathroom to get the mesh underwear, put the pad on, and by the time I get back to the bed, I am contracting, like leaning over the bed, like swaying through them. Josh is obviously up helping me. And so I say to the nurse, please call the anesthesiologist. I want an epidural. That was my plan the whole time, but I had to wait till I was actually like in labor, obviously, to get it. And she's like, no problem, calls him up. He's in a C-section, but he's finishing up, so he's gonna come soon. Great news. But in the meantime, I am really feeling these contractions. Like, I felt like my contractions were at the level that they were last time when I chose to get the epidural, like really feeling them. So she's like, I can offer you gas, laughing gas. And I'm like, sure, let's do that. A lot of women will say this, but I feel like the laughing gas didn't help. I wasn't about to try and contract without it, but it was still really painful. And it also, I didn't have a mask. I had like a tube that I would breathe through, and it was really awkward breathing through that tube while trying to contract. And you had to breathe out into the tube too, which I didn't like. Sometimes I wouldn't, but I think I was like letting laughing gas out into the room, which you're not supposed to do. My positions of choice were on my hands, like they lifted the bed up and I would lean against the bed and like sway, or I was kneeling on the bed, like facing where your head would go, and they lifted up the head rest and like kind of leaning on it like that. I was not prepared for natural labor. Like again, I'd listened to a lot of birth stories, so like I knew some things, but I did no real prep for a natural birth, so it was just kind of like, going with the flow. My midwife, again, wasn't there yet. When I passed the test, she got called to come over, but it had been like 2 seconds later that I started really contracting, so she wasn't there yet. And so I didn't know what positions to use, didn't know what to do to help. People always talked about counter pressure, but because I wasn't prepared for that, it didn't even cross my mind. I was just like, how do I survive this next contraction? I don't know what my time spacing was, but like they were ramping up. So it was 1 o'clock in the morning when I had my water break. Like 15 minutes later or something like that, I am leaning against the bed and I'm like, I feel like I have to poop my pants. And the nurse is like, okay, I'm gonna check you real quick. I'm like, okay, cool, thanks. So I sit on the bed and she checks me and she's like, you're only a 6. Hallelujah, great news. Still time to get that epidural. She's like, yep. And I ask her to call the anesthesiologist again. Calls him, he's finished up at the C-section, like just wrapping up. Gonna come here ASAP. Best news I could hear. I am really struggling through these contractions, not sure how to deal with them. I get back on the bed, leaning there. I was like, can you turn off the oxytocin? She's like, that's not gonna help you. She's like, you are like in labor now, like your body's running with it. I was getting really nervous at this point too because I was on oxytocin without an epidural, and I've always heard that like Pitocin contractions are a lot harder than natural labor contractions. I can't really tell you because I only went to 6 centimeters dilated with Rook before I got the epidural, so I don't know, it was really hard, but I can't compare it. It wasn't nice. So I really was like pressing for the epidural for multiple reasons, but one of them was I had a lot of fear, which people always say like if you enter labor with fear, it's going to be worse. Great. I didn't know what to do about it. Again, I was not prepared. But I was only 6 centimeters dilated, so it was fine. Epidural's coming. I had my laughing gas. Another like 15 minutes later, I'm like really having a hard time. And then the nurse offered me fentanyl. Great. I was like, whatever you can give me to help, I am there for it. So the way fentanyl works, if you didn't know, because I didn't know, you have your IV in and they have a syringe that they can just like put it directly into your bloodstream. And she said that you can get it every 10 minutes. And so it gives you like a wave of relief as opposed to the epidural, which just like numbs you. And you can only get 6 doses. So like use them sparingly, I guess. But I was like in it, like in the middle of active labor. So every 10 minutes, I'm like, give me another shot. That did help. It still was really painful, but I think it did take the edge off, and it really helped me between contractions. I, before this, was like really shaky and like anxious, I guess, between contractions, and when you're at that peak of fentanyl, you're just like feeling good between contractions, like high on life, chatty. You know, I only had a minute between contractions or something, if not less, but I have no idea what the timing was. But it felt really nice between contractions to get like a break. I was going back and forth between leaning against the bed to being on the bed. Eventually I stopped leaning against the bed because I felt like my knees were gonna give out. And I think it was around, I'm guesstimating these times based on when my water broke versus I had the baby. So at roughly 2 o'clock in the morning, I said, I feel like I need to poop again. Or no, I think I said, I kind of feel pushy. And so she checked me again. She's like, okay, you're at 8 centimeters dilated now. And I'm like, Lord help me. I know you're doing the best you can, nurse, but I need you to get me this epidural. Like, I am not about to push this baby out. I felt the same thing this time as I did last time, where I was happy to kind of deal with contractions until I was done with it. But I had a fear of like feeling the baby come out, like ring of fire, all that stuff. I really didn't want to feel the pushing and baby coming out. So I'm like, I don't care if I'm 9.5 centimeters dilated, like I need this epidural before I push the baby out. So she calls him up, he's on his way, you know, that's what they always say, they're on their way. And so I'm like, okay, like, let's keep going. I was really starting to panic at this point because, like, I guess I was in transition, and it's really difficult. That's when a lot of women tend to give up, they say, or like say that they need drugs when they initially didn't want them, because it's really hard. Like, and you know, there's all these breathing techniques you're supposed to do. I had a little bit of knowledge about it. Again, I did not prepare for going this far into labor without drugs, or the epidural specifically, but like none of that was going through my head. All that I was thinking about was like, please make this stop. This is horrible. What am I supposed to do? Josh did the best he can. I didn't prep him at all for labor because last time we were joking around until it was time to push because I was on drugs, the best drug. And he did great for his amount of knowledge, I guess. A little while later passes and I'm on the bed, swaying, dealing. The nurse is about to give me another shot of fentanyl, and I say, oh my God, like I'm pushing, like it's kind of happening. And so they flip me onto my back. The doctor comes in and checks me. I don't know why he was there at that point, but whatever. And he's like, yeah, you're 10 centimeters. Guess what, people? I did not get my epidural. Yeah, and like in the moment, I didn't really freak out about it because I'm like, it is what it is. Like, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, can I please get that fentanyl? She's like, sorry, you're not allowed it when you're pushing. If I had only gotten it like a second earlier, because I guess they don't want you to be high when you're pushing, whatever. So I get back on my hands and knees and like ready to push, and the doctor's like, oh, like, is that how you want to push? And I said, what are my other options? Again, I don't know what's going on. I know that I've liked laboring on my hands and knees, and I know that people do push like that. And he's like, well, you can go on your back. And I'm like, I am not doing that. Because when I was on my back to get checked, it did not feel good. So I went back on my hands and knees, and he's like, okay, yeah, I can allow you to push like that. Excuse me. Like, okay, maybe it's not common. I think it's common with midwiferys, but my midwife still wasn't there. And thankfully he wasn't like rude or anything about it. He's like, yeah, like I can let that happen. Okay, thank you. So I'm pushing without my midwife because she was on her way, but it was like 45 minutes since she'd been called, which I guess she was going a bit slow. I don't know, she said she lived close, but who was supposed to know that I was gonna progress so quickly when I was barely even on oxytocin at that point? So I push once, not really thinking about what I'm doing, just kind of trying to like defer the pain. And when I did that push, the nurse was like, direct your energy, like focus it, like I don't know what she was saying, but I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what are you telling me to do? And she's like, stop screaming. Or at least like focus it. I don't know, but she said like stop screaming, and I was like, okay, like I'm gonna scream if I want to, but I kind of get what you're saying. So I did keep screaming, but it was more of like groans, I think. This is all a blur, but kind of what I remember. So the second push went a lot better, and I asked like, oh my God, what's my progress? Like 2 pushes in, when is this gonna be over? And they said, oh yeah, like baby's on their way down. And I'm like, not good enough, which is such a funny mentality because I pushed for 2 hours with Rook, and for some reason I figured like, that's not gonna happen this time, baby's coming out right now. Like, I have decided. And I also know people are like, oh, you know, you wanna like push the baby out, but like the longer it takes, the more you'll like stretch things, less likely to tear. I had a first degree tear with Rook, which wasn't horrible, it wasn't great to heal from, and I didn't want to tear this time, but in that moment, I'm like, I don't care what happens, I need this baby to come out of me in whichever form it's gonna be. And then I think it was my third push, I said to the doctor, I'm like, I don't know what you're doing back there, but it feels horrible. Cause it felt like he had his finger in me, like pushing down on my, what's that called? Perineum. It felt really bad. And he's like, I'm not touching you. I felt so bad afterwards. I'm like, sorry for yelling at you. Like, I thought you were putting me in more pain. But no, that was just the baby coming out. So then I pushed a 4th time, really like, you know, giving it like all my energy was to get that baby out. And sure enough, baby came out after 4 pushes, which was wild. Again, the difference from first birth to this birth. It is quite different pushing with an epidural because you can't actually feel what you're doing. And this time I very much felt everything and was like determined. I mean, if I could have pushed on my back, it probably would have been nicer, because after pushing your baby out on your hands and knees, they kind of like brought Finn up underneath me, and I had to like turn onto my back. And I hear people say like, oh, after you push the baby out, it's like such a relief. Like you don't feel the pain anymore because like you have such a decrease in pain. Not the case for me. I was still in a lot of pain. They were trying to get me to roll onto my back as I'm trying to grab my baby, and I'm just feeling all the things I don't want to feel. And they're like, check the sex of the baby, check the sex. And I'm like, can I please just like focus on me for a second? But Josh was there and he like opened up the leg and was like, oh, we have another son. Last time when I found out I was having a son, I was bawling, crying, so excited. This time I'm like, great, can someone please just help me get onto my back right now, because this feels horrible. So I don't feel like necessarily sad that I didn't have that like euphoric moment, because I had it with Rook and it was just different. Like I was focusing on my pain this time. I didn't have pain last time. And so they get me on my back, baby's on my chest. That is when I'm like, oh wow, like look, this is my child, how exciting. Again, I hear that like pushing out the placenta is nothing, which, you know, it's not as intense as pushing a baby out, but I was still just in so much residual pain that I was like, how soon can we get this placenta out? Because I just want to be able to like know that everything is like done and over with. And it was a little while until they did that. Oh, that's when my midwife came in, was to deliver the placenta, funny enough. I like was clueless at this point. I wasn't paying attention to anything except myself, obviously, when I'm trying to push. So I didn't even notice all of a sudden she appeared and was like telling me to push the placenta out. But even like pushing the placenta out, I was like, oh, like I really don't want to do this. This is painful. I don't know. Everyone has a different experience. All the afterbirth stuff, I remember last time going by a lot quicker. I think because I had been pushing for 2 hours, my head hurt so much, I was so exhausted that I was kind of like half there, like just completely out of it. So this time around, I was like ready to do all the things. I'm like, let's get the placenta out, let's get me in the shower, let's put my baby on the boob, like, can we just do it all right now? And my midwife was like, okay, like chill, like we don't need to do all these things right away. Like right when I had Finn put on my chest, I was like trying to breastfeed him. And I guess normally people like take a second, I don't know. He didn't latch right away, but he latched within like 5 minutes and that was good. The placenta felt like a long time till that came out. It wasn't for a couple hours that I went and took a shower, which again, last time I just remember it going by quicker. Oh, I also immediately asked like, did I tear? Did I tear? Because that's a big thing, right, for your healing process. And they're like, we don't know yet. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? But I guess there's like a lot going on down there that they need a minute to check. And I didn't tear. Don't know how. Well, I kind of have an idea. I didn't do anything in the moment to try and prevent it. Obviously, I was like just focused on getting the baby out. But with Finn being smaller and it being my second baby, I assume that's what it was. So he came out, he measured 6 pounds, 4 ounces, which is a very normal size for a baby. Again, they expected him to be an average overall size. His abdomen, I mean, like, I guess I don't know babies well enough. Like I wouldn't, and a lot of people have said this, you wouldn't look at him and be like, oh, that kid has a small abdomen. But I guess, I don't know, it was measuring under the 2nd percentile, so it was significant. I don't know how to understand these things. But yeah, he was smaller, so he came out easier, didn't tear, which has been huge for recovery. Like still some soreness, but like no pain while peeing. After a week postpartum, I felt mostly like myself, still like taking it easy. Like my midwife was saying, like try to limit your lifting and everything, like your body is healing, but felt so much better this time. Holy. I also got to see my placenta this time, which last time they just whisked it away and didn't give me the option. This time I specifically asked at my midwife appointments if I could see it. And so my midwife brought it over and like was telling me all the parts. She said it's pretty small, like I think it was like this big, which usually they say like dinner plate, but she said it's expected that it's small because usually the size of the placenta corresponds with the size of the baby. So smaller baby, smaller placenta. Again, he wasn't like small, but he was like normally small, you know. And she said that she was actually going to send it over to pathology to see if anything comes up indicating why he had the abdomen issue. So that was really nice. It wouldn't change anything, you know. My midwife was saying like, you did nothing wrong, you know, it's just an anomaly. No one knows why these things happen. So if you were to get pregnant again, it's not like a guaranteed thing or anything, but it just would be nice to know what went on. Oh, my midwife also said, before I got induced, when she was still there, she said that they would have a pediatric doctor at the birth to just in case something is wrong with the baby after he came out. And that didn't happen because again, everything happened so quickly. And she said, oh, like we don't even need it. Like he's passing all his tests, he's healthy, like everything's good. Really like best case scenario for what could have happened. So just to wrap up the size issue. So he was, I didn't even mention this, but when I was told that the abdomen was in the 2nd percentile, I guess I was diagnosed. I don't know if that's the right term, but baby had fetal growth restriction, which I think is like an umbrella term because like multiple things can cause it. But yeah, that's what it was. Something was restricting his abdomen's growth. And a week later, we got the pathology report back saying that the placenta was at the right maturity. Placenta was normal, but the umbilical cord was hypercoiled, which my midwife didn't have a lot of information on that, but like the umbilical cord is a coil to help if something presses on it, it won't prevent flow through. And so mine was hypercoiled, so a tighter coil meaning restricted flow. And also his umbilical cord fell off after 3 days with no bleeding. Isn't that crazy? If you don't know, it usually falls off between 10 and 20 days after birth. Rook's fell off, I think after a week by accident, and it was like bleeding. It was not great. But yeah, his fell off 3 days after birth, no bleeding. And when that happened, this was again before the pathology report, but my midwife is like, oh yeah, like he must have not had a great connection with the umbilical cord. So that's kind of what we're thinking has happened. Nothing is like technically diagnosed or identified, I guess. I mean, like I did have the hypercoiling, but they can't say like, oh, the hypercoiling caused the fetal growth restriction. I don't really know. I'm just telling you what I've been told, that it probably happened like that. I was just told that the hypercoiled umbilical cord probably caused a lack of nutrition, causing the abdomen to be small. And I mean, you shouldn't really like Google these things, right? But I Googled it and some fairly scary stories come up of like people losing their babies and such. So my midwife is like, yeah, you know, it's like really good we induced you when we did, when baby was still moving. That's a great thing to hear. So yeah, I am so grateful with how everything panned out for having a complication. It was like the best complication to have because everything still went fine. I still had my baby vaginally. Baby's super healthy and normal. His abdomen, actually I don't know if his abdomen is back to normal size, but like I can tell his abdomen has grown a lot. He gained his birth weight back, or he got back to his birth weight, I think it was like 4 or 5 days postpartum, and now he's beyond it, doing super well. He latches okay, but like he's feeding really well, sleeping okay. He's a newborn, you know, like nothing out of the ordinary. Everything is super normal, and I am beyond grateful because things, like I said, things can go sideways really fast, and I'm so grateful that we caught things when we did and were maybe over precautious at some points. and got Finn out when we needed to get him out. So yeah, this is a long story, but it was a long process. I am really happy with how birth went after the fact. Like, Josh is like, isn't it nice to know that like you did a natural birth and you like know what it feels like? And I'm like, I could have gone without knowing. If I were to have a third baby, I definitely want an epidural again, because that pain is like nothing else. But it's like a toss-up where, because it was so fast, oh, I don't think I mentioned this, but I had him at 2:30. Oh, sorry, my water broke at 1:30. I had him an hour after my water broke. So it happened so quickly, going from really mild contractions to birthing the baby in an hour made it really manageable. You know, in the moment you're thinking like, I can't do this much longer, I need the drugs, yada yada, because you just don't know how much longer you have left. But if I had known it would only be an hour, then it's like, okay, like that was doable. Again, this is after the fact. When I'm not in the pain, in the moment, it's the worst. So I would like a drug next time. Not that there's no plan for next time. I think we're done with 2 kids, but I'm not traumatized by anything. Like, I know some women really don't handle it well when you have a natural birth after wanting an epidural. But because it was so fast, it was manageable, and I feel positive about the experience and thankful that, again, things went the way they went. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my birth story. I didn't mention this, but I was planning on filming some of it just kind of for myself, but things went so wild so quickly, there was no time for that. So I have a couple photos and like that's kind of it. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed my birth story. I hope it's helpful for anyone else going through growth issues, fetal growth restriction, because I found it kind of hard to get information on that stuff, or hear people's stories anyways. So yeah, that was my experience, and I hope it helps you out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.